Hello and welcome back to the DIF, the online festival of ideas which asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? My name is Nora Clinton and I'm a member of the learning team here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I'm your host for today's session. If you have questions for our speaker today, please don't forget to use Twitter at #ThinkDiff or to put your questions in the discussion box at the side of the page. So everyone is talking about the role of automation and its effects on the future of work. And our guest today is going to help us to explore this topic. So Benedict Dellot is the head of the Future Work Centre at the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce here in the UK. Thank you for being with us here today, Benedict.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Benedict, Lord Adair Turner says that the rapid, unstoppable and limitless progress of automation potential will have profound implications on the nature of and even the need for work. What are your thoughts on this?
So Adair Turner is an incredibly well-respected academic, business, financier, incredibly knowledgeable, has written very eloquently on this topic of automation. But he is just one voice among several, and there are many who would disagree with him. So you have the likes of Rodney Brooks, who is less of a well-known figure in the UK, but he's a robotics expert in the US, and he believes that fears of mass automation are in fact ludicrous. And you've got someone like Robert Solow, a US economist, who says that the fear of automation is more like the fear of a collision with an asteroid. So it's spectacular, it's visceral, it's evocative, but these guys don't think it's likely to actually take place on the scale that some people think it is, the likes of Adair Turner. But I think these conversations and these debates are a little bit narrow in many ways. I think what we need to do is maybe take a step back and think about how technology is changing the workplace in different ways. So number one is, I think we should be paying much more attention to other technologies alongside AI and robotics. So we have those technologies which we obsess over, but there's also other more prosaic bread and butter technologies like e-commerce platforms, like smartphones, some more out there technologies like blockchain, Internet of Things, and distributed manufacturing, additive manufacturing. These technologies will affect work just as much, I think, as robotics and AI will. The second is that we need to not obsess just about automation. Automation is the removal of certain tasks, certain jobs, but actually technology will change things like recruitment practices. They'll change organization and business models. The rise of Uber and Deliveroo wouldn't happen without powerful algorithms which underpin them.
But I would just like to say there, Benedict, is you mentioned there that automation will remove jobs, and can we just maybe zone down on that point, because it is the thing that somehow it creates tension and a little bit of anxiety around automation. Can you give us a sense of what the RSA's thinking is in this space?
So with regards to automation, our initial hypothesis is that the fears over mass automation are overstated, and they're overstated for a number of reasons. Number one is that technology is still limited in what it can do. So, I mean, yes, we have algorithms that can now help to diagnose diseases, as that really is trained doctors. We now have certain technologies which can help to spot cybersecurity threats and so on and so forth. But there's no machine that's out there which can easily turn the page of a book, which can open a door with ease, which can climb stairs. Some of the things that we expect from a 5-year-old toddler, let alone an adult. So actually we need to be very skeptical of some of the claims of what technology can do. The second thing, and this is something we discussed earlier, is that actually technology has an impact on tasks, not whole jobs. So because all of our jobs contain a bundle of tasks, the removal of one by a machine doesn't necessarily lead to the elimination of the whole job. So if you take the example of retail workers have a number of different tasks that they do. They greet customers, they process transactions on tills, they change window displays, and so on and so forth. And the introduction of one technology in a retail shop does not remove the whole job. Jobs pivot. So we have nurses, we have doctors, we have architects, we have lawyers. I think those occupations will exist in 15 years' time and 20 years' time, but they'll just be slightly different. We'll evolve and we'll pivot, but we won't necessarily see the removal of those jobs.
Yeah, I think,
And
I think it's a good point. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just on that note, you know, we all do it these days. We walk into the supermarket and we realise that there's one person at the cashier desk and there's then 6 machines, which you can either go to the cashier desk or you go to the machine with your food and you scan it through, and there is one person supervising those machines. I try to think back and think to myself, oh, would there have been more people here at the time? There's a part of me that thinks there would have been more people there, that one supervisor is supervising 6 machines. Do you have a similar thought when you walk into supermarkets?
The connections.
Yeah, I think we're having some
frog.
connection problems at the minute.
I caught the tail end of that, but I think the other question, which was about self-service checkouts being, that's okay if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, Benedict. Unfortunately, we are having some connection issues.
So I think, with regards to retail, I can hear you now if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Benedict. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. The question of checkout operators in stores. Yes, I do think that the introduction of those machines will gradually lead to a reduction in that workforce. But also, I think the bigger change here is actually about e-commerce platforms. Okay. The thing about self-service checkouts is they're pretty basic, mundane technology. It's not really even AI as we know it in the form of machine learning. It's what people call expert systems. It's really basic computing technology, and you actually wonder why it's taken so long for this to be installed in shops before. So I think number one thing is to say this is quite basic technology. Number two is that people still want to use face-to-face cashiers, even if they do have that technology, and that's because these technologies, and this technology in particular, is still rudimentary. It's still basic in its functions. It still goes wrong, and so people will be employed as cashiers for the near future. But there's a bigger trend going on, which I mentioned, which is about the rise of e-commerce platforms and online grocery shopping, and that's perhaps where we should be paying more attention. And what that will mean is that actually the number of bricks and mortar retail shops you have in the future will start to fall, regardless of whether they have self-service checkouts or not, and more people will do their shopping online. Now, some people will say that's a bad thing, and I'd agree that the loss of high street activity is not a great thing for our economy. It's not the great thing for the vibrancy of town centres. But we are seeing an increase in jobs in warehouse work, and actually, if you look at the data on wages, warehouse work is better paid. The issue there is around who finds that work and where that work is. So warehouse work is predominantly filled by men, whereas bricks and mortar retail work is predominantly filled by women. And also warehouse work is centred in certain geographic locations, such as the Midlands, places like Leeds, places like Corby and Kettering, towns which are in these Midlands. They're not based everywhere in every corner of our country, which is where bricks and mortar retail shops are. So it's almost like we start a conversation about one particular technology, and then we realise, well, actually there are bigger changes happening elsewhere, and actually that's the sort of microcosm of the debate that we need to have across these different technologies which are starting to emerge. Okay,
and when I think it's a fair point of trying to distinguish in our heads the different technologies and where they sit and what their capacities they are. When you look at AI, which actually can learn from humans and continues to build knowledge and progresses ideas, etc., etc. Where do you see AI being used now? How do you see the AI story playing out? Let's say and not moving away from the story of automation.
So I think there are multiple ways that artificial intelligence is changing the nature of work. I mentioned the first of these that everyone focuses on is automation, and that's an important one to look at, but there are also other ways that it will change work. So AI, for example, is now being used to sift through CVs in recruitment, to make sure that only a certain group of individuals are put through to interview stage. It's also being used to monitor performance and to create a baseline of performance in workplaces so that you can identify who is perhaps inefficient or unproductive according to the creators of that algorithm. It's being used in other forms of surveillance and monitoring. It's being used in changing business models. I mentioned that gig platforms like Uber and Deliveroo are powered by sophisticated algorithms which are therefore atomizing work. Work is coming through the form of on-demand gigs as opposed to full jobs. And that's all due to sophisticated AI technology. So it's important to recognize that this isn't just about jobs that are lost, that are taken from machines. It's also about jobs that are changed and reoriented. And in the near term, I think that's where we should be paying our attention to. So for example, if a company that's quite large starts to use an algorithm to aid its interview process, we need to make sure that that algorithm doesn't bake in biases. So if recruitment is, for example, if the recruitment algorithm is trained using data about the organization's workforce, well, if your prior recruitment practices were biased and you limited diversity in your organization just through human error, then the algorithms which are trained on your existing workforce and its makeup will in turn accelerate and amplify that bias. So those are the things which are pressing and they're real and they're happening today.
Yeah, and I'd like to come in on that point. I'd like to come in on that point, Benedict, because I think it's a really interesting point. Like I can see what you're saying. You know, there is great potential in technology. We know that, and the argument that is often put to us is that it's not the technology that we have to be thinking about, but more how we as humans interact with it and the values that we somehow, as a society decide for, we in some ways program into, AI and things like this. As you were saying, these algorithms around work, we have to make sure there are no inherent biases and things like this. This argument is very interesting to me. How do we as a society start to think about programming values into the world of technology? What does that discussion look like? Where is that discussion held? And how can people become part of it?
So I think this is a really good point. When we're thinking about how do we steward and steer technology in a way which benefits the majority of people, the conversation right now I think is quite limited to a discussion on welfare and tax reform. So the likes of Bill Gates suggesting that we should have a robot tax, and others talking about a universal basic income. Now, with UBI, actually, the RSA is an advocate of at least piloting these type of schemes to test out whether they have a merit, have a value. But what we're thinking in the Future Work Centre is actually where can we intervene in the entire life cycle of a technology, not just coming in right at the end and mopping up problems and saying, okay, this technology has been used, it's generated this amount of wealth, how do we tax that and then redistribute it? Actually, how do we think about intervening from day one when investors are thinking about which technologies to invest in, tech companies are thinking about which technologies to create, tech workers are working on it, employers are thinking about which technologies to deploy in their workplaces. These are decisions which we can actually sway and have influence on. So for example, I had a recent conversation with a pension company, a pension fund company, which was thinking about how can it sway the behavior of the companies that it invests in with a hell of a lot of money to automate responsibly. So there's a number of big names. I can't mention them because they didn't want me to, but they have a number of big names of companies that they're working with and saying, should you really be using X technology? Maybe you should be using Y technology, which has much better impact on workers. So that's what we should be talking about. In terms of values, this is tricky because values are different from country to country. And a really interesting research report came out, which was looking at self-driving cars. And with self-driving cars, what it boils down to, what the problems often boil down to, are moral judgments. So even if you have a self-driving car technology which can traverse through streets, which can stop if something jumps into the middle of the road, which can dodge things which just fly out of nowhere, it's going to have to sometimes make a moral judgment about which lives are more important. So is it the life of the driver behind the wheel, or is it the life of the pedestrian that walks into the middle of the road? And if we know that one of those lives is at risk from the car abruptly halting or swerving, then there is a moral decision that has to be made. So anyway, the study actually looked at different responses, and different countries, actually the population had a different view as to whether it should be the driver that should be at risk, or whether it's the person who jumps into the middle of the road. And they had different views depending on how old those people were, whether they were young, whether they were old. And it was fascinating to see that actually there's no consensus on the values that we should embed in this technology. So that's something that it can't be solved with a simple answer. Actually, it's almost as though these conversations have to be country by country.
Right, and when you say country by country, is it the government that you look to be having those conversations? Is it industry? Who, does the government have to? Is this a command and control? Do they need to take hold of this conversation?
So I think that there's only so many things that governments can do. I think one of the best things we've seen recently is GDPR. For all of the complications and headaches it has caused some people, actually it's introduced a level of rigor in how we monitor, treat, store data in a way which will have positive implications for all of us, for our privacy. And so that's a great thing that the government can do. But there are limitations. There are limitations to how much it can regulate. And some things just have to be left to employers, and some things have to be left to consumers. And it's actually what we think to be everyone's responsibility to ensure that good work prevails in an age of automation and radical technologies. So consumers, for example, if we want parcels to be delivered in the evenings, if we want them to be delivered on weekends, then we're going to have delivery drivers who are working outside of normal hours, who are working antisocial hours, and we're going to have a big growing e-commerce and online grocery business. And that's something that we have to face up to as consumers. It's not something that we can rely on government to solve. Ultimately, our behaviours as consumers has an impact on work and the way that we use different technologies.
I can see that for sure. Benedict, I'm just going to stop you there because I've got a question come in online from Christina, and she said, isn't there a risk that automation will lead to giant tech firms getting a cut from everyone's businesses, leading to greater inequalities?
Yes, I do. In a digitized economy where data is highly valuable, if you have, broadly speaking, if you have more of that data, then you are able to know more about people, you're able to know more about consumers, and you're much more competitive. And so what we're seeing is the big tech companies of Google, Amazon, Facebook, and others actually starting to reach into new markets. So we've seen, for example, that Amazon is now moving into bricks and mortar retail with its purchase of Whole Foods. Facebook considering banking. Apple now positioning itself as a healthcare provider. And as you have concentrated markets, that's bad news. It's arguably bad news for innovation. It's arguably bad news for workers who have less bargaining power. And it's also bad news for democracy. The stronger that big companies become, the more powerful they become, the more sway they have on regulation. Okay. And that's bad news.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm conscious that we're nearly out of time, but just as a last snapshot, I'm sensing that the RSA is very positive about the role of technology on the future of work, and I do want to bring that back here because I don't want to just talk about all of those murky things that we sense to have anxiety around. Would you like to just say one last statement, maybe cutting through the hype, on where you think it's really at? Just to give, as you were very close to this argument, just to give the audience that sense of your thinking.
Yes, so fundamentally, I actually think that we're underinvesting in technology. I think that you've got as we've just mentioned, your tech giants who are leading the way, and they are accelerating their innovations, not just in the US and Silicon Valley, but also in the East, in China. And if we don't actually invest in technology across the board, small businesses, large businesses in the UK, we're going to see a difficulty in market concentration going forward. And so actually we need to accelerate technology, but we need to accelerate it on our own terms. And we often forget that actually technology has been a massive force for social progress, for wealth creation. It's the reason why we've seen poverty rates fall. It's the reason why we've seen an end to backbreaking work. It's the reason why we've had an extension in lifespans. It's the reason why drug discovery has accelerated. And so we shouldn't lose the sight of the positives and the opportunities which technology brings. And that's too much to throw away. We basically just want to make sure we're not throwing up the baby with the bathwater when we try to steer and clamp down on some of the more pernicious uses of technology. Let's keep an eye on its beneficial uses as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Benedict, for joining us today. It's been great to have your insight into this very, very current topic. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So, we are now, I'm just going to check one thing with our team. Yes, okay, it looks like we have also got a second speaker who has managed to come online. We had a few technical issues earlier, but we will be switching over to a second speaker just after this short film, which is a film, and two short films in fact, which are highlights from films looking at an interview with Azim Azar, who talks about the future of work, and also a short film looking at a social business in Brazil, which is doing wonderful work creating healthy food for communities in the favelas. I'll see you back after these short clips.
It so breaks the narrative.
And everyone seems to think but there's a real dark side to it. But is that...
Look, it breaks the narrative. There are lots of reasons why the gig economy creates opportunities and why it creates problems. And there's no question that the way that Uber for a while carried itself was not a particularly pleasant way for it or for us. The funny thing about the gig economy is that if you talk to Uber drivers, they're generally pretty satisfied. The Oxford Martin School recently came out with a study that was co-authored by some people from Uber, so some caveats there, but it was a very strong university school with some impeccable academics, and they looked at Uber drivers in London and they found a few things. They're really delighted. They're happy people. They're happier on average than Londoners. A vast majority of them change their working hours week to week. And most of them were working on average 30 hours. So what's wonderful is that even though Uber was launched by by somebody who was quite a libertarian, where essentially cash is king, and it was homo economicus of the kind of horrible neoliberal economic consensus of the 70s, Uber drivers were trading off money for time. Their utility curves in economic speak were not just about the greenback. And what the research was saying was, we don't mind earning less because we have much more flexibility. We can live much more wholesome lives. We can be closer to the non-financial, non-work things that matter to being a whole person. So in all of the challenges of the gig economy, being more precarious, not having a pension, not knowing day to day, all the things that the unions rightly kind of question, there's also this other side, which is, you know what, I'm not going to do a 10-hour shift today because my mum's sick and I need to go and see her. Or I'm going to stop at 3 because I've got to pick up the kids from school.
Problemas relacionados a péssimos hábitos alimentares na comunidade é a coisa mais comum possível. Então a ideia que a gente tinha era de levar alimentação saudável para a comunidade. Mas da onde vem um produto? Eu não estava atento para isso, eu preciso do produto ali. Então a gente começou a incentivar que tivesse a agricultura dentro da comunidade para ficar mais perto, para que a gente comprasse e que a comunidade também fosse privilegiada em ter acesso àquela alimentação. E aí eu vi uma oportunidade de negócio. O desenho estava perfeito e agora vamos vender. O Saladorama é um negócio social. E ser um negócio social é pensar no desenvolvimento da comunidade em todas as esferas e também ganhar dinheiro com isso. Um dos maiores desafios é criar um modelo de negócio sustentável dentro de uma periferia com uma proposta tão desafiadora que é mudar uma cultura de alimentação. Desse modelo, que começou a fazer muito sentido, a gente começou a replicar para outras comunidades. O funcionamento da economia local nas periferias traz primeiro um resultado gigante, que é a empregabilidade. Mas quando esse dinheiro ele faz o giro dentro da própria comunidade, os serviços dentro da comunidade melhoram, as pessoas têm mais qualidade de vida. Então eu acredito que essa evolução de negócio social, ela vai passar a ser negócios de impacto social. Vão ser empresas de impacto social. São empresas que se preocupam não só com a venda do seu produto, mas qual é o ciclo que esse dinheiro faz e qual é o impacto que a empresa em si causa na sociedade. Meu nome é Hamilton Henrique, tenho 30 anos, morador de Recife e sou fundador do Saladorama.
Welcome back. So we've just heard from Benedict, who explained to us his take on the role of automation and the future of work. And our next speaker today is Radhika Bynon, who is the Director of Programs focusing on places and communities at the Young Foundation. Welcome, Radhika. Thank you for being with us today.
It's a delight to be here.
Radhika, we've just watched a wonderful film about a guy in Brazil called Enriquez who took it upon himself, looking around his community, realizing there was a problem with food and diet and people not eating very well. He took it upon himself to create urban farms and to start growing food for the community. And in my head, this is labeled as a social business. You, however, work in the space of social innovation, and I'm interested in the difference of semantics. Can you tell me, is social business part of social innovation? How are the two connected?
Hi, Nora. Yes, absolutely. Really happy to do that. I mean, fundamentally, social innovation is about change making. So the conversation we've just had with Benedict was also about, about the changes that are happening. But many of those changes are actually led not from a social basis, but from much more from a big business or an institutional framework. And what social innovation is change making that is coming bottom up, and many exciting things happening, like the example that you've just shared in Brazil. And sometimes they have a business model. So the one in that favela, that food business, that is a business, and there is an income generation, and there is a business model there, which is great because that ensures sustainability. But many social innovations are also are campaigns. They are issue based. They're awareness raising. They're collaborations. So for us, social innovation is about change making, and particularly change making that is centered around people. And at the Young Foundation, we're really interested in communities and so thinking about people in the context of residents, people who have a connection to a place, who really care about that place and who want that place to change. And for us, those are the social innovators. And sometimes the things that they want to do will have a business. And there is support for that, and if you're running a social business in the UK particularly, there's really good support for you available. You can get grants, you can get help, and I can talk a bit more about that. But actually, connecting to the things that Benedict was saying, that as the world is changing, the scale of the challenges that we face, the solutions are going to come from us. Nobody's going to give us these solutions. We are going to have to have the solutions. Sometimes they'll come from entrepreneurs, sometimes they'll come from, from the big businesses, but actually the most exciting things often come from the bottom, from the people who are experiencing it, who know what the challenge is, who experience it on a daily basis. The guy in Brazil, no big pharma company, no big company is going to come and sort out that problem because nobody knows it the way he knows it. Nobody understands it the way they do. So the solution is much more sustainable and much more impactful when it comes from the bottom line that way.
That's great. Thank you for explaining that. And Radhika, when I look at your projects at the Young Foundation, could you also give me an example of some of the work that you're doing? Obviously, we've seen the Enrique story. Can you give us another example of some kind of other work that you do in this space?
Yes, so we do. So let me just tell a little bit about the Young Foundation is, just very quickly. So basically, we're called the Young Foundation, named after a person. So it's not about working with young people. We're named after a person called Michael Young, who is one of the UK's great, he was one of the 100 best people for the last century, I think, Great Britain's. And essentially, he was a man who started off his career in government. He helped to write the 1945 manifesto, Labour manifesto, which created the welfare state. So very much at the heart of government, creating social change from where power sits, right in the middle there. And after a few years of that, he left government and said, we cannot get the scale of change we want working in this way. So he moved into communities, moved here into Bethnal Green, where we're still based, and did and looked at what was happening in that community. And Bethnal Green at the time was having a slum clearance, so it was post-war. New housing was being built, and the community in Bethnal Green was moved out of this sort of network that existed here into the shires. Brand new town out in Basingstoke and places like that. And what Michael Young said was, hang on, when you're doing this, when you are moving people, you are undermining the networks and the resources and the assets that people, the relationships that people have built up. You're breaking up a community. And it's that insight that says, actually, the change needs to take into account the people for whom that change is happening. So from being a sort of social historian, he went on to be what we call a social innovator, an entrepreneur who created the Open University, Consumers Association, Language Line, the Health Line, which became NHS 111, just a whole plethora of initiatives which he started as ideas and then spun off as independent institutions which now currently exist and are making great change in the world. And so we're not an empire building organisation, we are an organisation that loves ideas, that loves to create things, and then they go off into the world and exist independently. And so one of the organisations that we've just spun out in this last year is called Action for Happiness, and it's a social innovation. It's a group of people that came together to say, actually, what matters most in the world, in 21st century Britain, what people want most is to be happy. And is happiness, and what are the things, how can we improve people's understanding of what happiness is, how happiness is created, how you measure happiness. So Action for Happiness goes around recognizing that actually the things that make people happy are relationships, it's not about consumerism and buying the next thing, whatever. And so
can I come in there, Radhika, because I think it's a really, really good topic. I've just come back from Finland, who have a social innovation fund which is set up, and its main focus is focusing on human well-being. So instead of looking at GDP and all of these things, they're saying that as a society, what we should be really interested in here is human well-being. And I think it's a really interesting concept. How are you seeing these concepts of, happiness, well-being being taken up by governments? Obviously, it feeds very much into the story of, we tend to see the economy as being the only thing which is a judge or a thermometer of our well-being. Do you see governments interested in these arguments around happiness and social innovation and community?
Yes. Definitely. I mean, one of the things is the real connection between well-being and health. So the reason governments are interested in it is because it has actual financial implications. The reality is that well-being leads to improved health and therefore less expense and less all the social consequences of unease, the depression rates and mental health problems that as a nation we experience, and not just the UK but across the developed world. Mental health issues are really, really staggeringly increasing, and that is about that we've forgotten how to look after ourselves and how to look after ourselves as a community. So for us, social innovation is about saying, let's start at that level. Let's start at the level at which people experience daily life. What is it that makes them flourish? How do you make people flourish? How do you make places flourish? And to connect back to the things that Benedict was saying is that actually the changes that are coming, that actually the solution to work, to depression, to mental health problems, to lack of well-being is actually is helping the people who are experiencing those things, to help them to shape the solutions. So I think certainly in the context of work, that what we have discovered is that even the supermarket idea. In many supermarkets now, what's happening is that they've become a hub for a local community. In my local supermarket in East London, where I live, there's a huge notice board which has become a real buzz for where people go to find out information. We have Facebook groups, we have all that, but people love a notice board. And
Can I just come in here, Radhika, because I think it's a really good point. I'm wondering if you're seeing a reflourishing of this sense of community. I look at my own life, and maybe it's because now I have 2 kids and I'm maybe a little bit more integrated in the past. But when you tend to be, the young working professional, it's all about work. You're working every day. You have your commute. You go to the office. You come home in the evening. Weekends you're exhausted. You might go out with your friends, etc., etc. And community is not always very present. However, at this stage of my life, I feel I'm integrating more. Do you see fluctuations in when people come back to the community during their lives? And maybe also, do you see more young people going towards it these days? I'd be interested in both those questions.
Yeah, so firstly, to talk about the life stage thing, definitely our connection to place. I think it is to do with connection to place and to each other. So our connection to place changes over a life course. So absolutely, your personal experience about the point at which you start to create family and you start to, when you have kids, it really matters who's around you. That actually when you are in an earlier stage in your life, you can have friends all across the city, you can have, or your closest networks can be anywhere, and you can connect with them and go off and see them, and it's fine. But actually when you need kids to be picked up from school, taken to school, when you need to go to the park, you need to do all the practical things that families do, actually the people around you really matter. And so people do, so at that stage in life, people are more interested. And certainly all the work that I do in terms of the changes that people are making, the great ideas that people have in neighborhoods, it's often led by parents, because they're doing it to make the place better for themselves, for their children, and for their neighbors. So definitely there is a great increasing focus on community at that stage in life. Another stage is early retirement. So what's happening now is that we've got a generation of people who are no longer working full time, but actually have lots of capacity and energy and resources to share, and they get stuck into their communities. But in between, it is harder, and I think the working patterns that many of us experience are not conducive to community, and I think that's what's leading to the discontent and the lack of well-being and the unease that so many people experience, because there isn't that sense of belonging, that sense of connection. And what we're really interested in doing is how do you build that throughout people's life course? So it's not just for the people who are having children or just for the people who are retiring. What we need well-being across our life course, and also we need to help people to recognize the value of relationships, not just when you're older and at risk of isolation, or when you're in need of friends for your kids, but actually we need relationship all the way along, and we need to practice those skills all the way along, so that when we are older, we will not be at risk as such great risk of isolation.
And tell me, how are you trying these days to bring, I think I completely agree with you that in some ways I also feel it was too late. I was like, why am I only asking these questions now? Do you engage with teenagers? Do you engage with young people? And what do those programs look like?
Absolutely. So we've got a program called Amplify Youth, which is we're working with young people. We're working here in Tower Hamlets, which is where we're in inner London, also in Belfast and in Dublin. So we've got projects in these 3 cities, looking specifically, working with young people to say, what is it you want to change in your community? What is it? Because kids, young people, everybody is frustrated and has kind of niggles about the things around them. What isn't here? What doesn't work well? This is the instigation for innovation. That all innovation comes from an irritation, from something that doesn't work. Uber came around because somebody came out of a conference center and couldn't get a taxi in Paris. Etc. So so what we're saying is, young people have that frustration too, and do they have that
sense of agency? That's the important thing also for me, because I think sometimes do we instill agency in young people, because the world is for the taking in some ways, but sometimes I worry that we're very top down, that things have to come from above. So I'm wondering whether you're seeing seeing young people with a sense of agency. This is my community and I want to be part of it. It would be great to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I think certainly there is a group of young people that feel that way, who feel very empowered and who feel able to take action. But one of our things is, how do you move that out? So it's not just a small group of young people that feel that, but how do we get many more young people to do it? And so we're working through schools, and some of the things is to enable young people to practice that, to say, actually, this is what bothers me, and then work with them to say, okay, well, what can we change about that? Who do we need to talk to? What is the change we want to make? And to build up that muscle, because why I think it's important is that it's important for young people to feel they can, to see the agency they have, to practice the skill of working through a problem, developing a solution, working with some other people to make that reality, bashing away at the doors that might close in your way. And if you do that as a young person and then keep doing it through your life, this is what's going to help us as automation comes our way, as all these big changes come, as climate change, all the huge problems that exist. We have the capacity to solve those, but what we need to do is we need to unleash the energy right across the country, not just leave it for the elites to say, or the people in power to say, you guys sort it out and we'll just come and consume it. No. The changes are going to come when we all engage. And so I'm excited about UBI because I think, that as work changes and we have more time, we may be able to deal with these really big problems, because one of the challenges we have at the moment is the world of work is so demanding that there's a whole group of people who are excluded just because they're working long hours and don't really have enough energy left. So if we can train young people, and we start young, so this Amplify Youth working with young people in Tower Hamlets, in Belfast, in Dublin, and they have got loads of ideas of things they want to change. And some of them are big changes and some of them are small changes, but the important thing is that whatever it is they want to do, that they are supported to see that through, to see the impact of it, and then they can become more ambitious and have greater expectations for the change that's possible.
Wonderful. Radhika, you mentioned UBI, and that for viewers at home is the Universal Basic Income. It is very current at the minute, and also in some ways linked to Benedict's talk earlier. We see lots of changes coming. We see that, work will be displaced. Benedict also says, that there is, and he's rightly so, there will also be opportunities for work created. But the thinking around UBI and Universal Basic Income is continuing to build, and the discussion is continuing to be had. Obviously, UBI would probably free up a lot more time for people to get involved in the community and for making communities a better place. That's my first thought on the top of my head. What is your thought on Universal Basic Income, and has the Young Foundation taken a position on it?
Yes, so we're really interested in it, and we are working with the City of Barcelona, who are one of the places that are doing a UBI pilot. They're testing it, and they're testing it in a small community, so it's not universal. I mean, UBI says universal basic income. This is just basic minimum income for a particular group of people. So in Barcelona, in quite a challenging part of Barcelona, and we're working with on that initiative to work with the local people who are experiencing it to see what's the impact it's having on their lives. How can we understand from this pilot how it might be scaled in a really effective way? So we're very excited by it, enthusiastic about it, but we know that there's a lot of work to be done before this can be something that's easily roll outable. So, and one of the reasons why we're really excited about it is because because of the capacity it releases, because it starts to say, actually, if you are not able to get a job, your creativity, your capacity, your agency, your change-making potential, all that still continues to be really valuable. At the moment, many of the changes that the impacts people have in their lives is through their work, and we're trying to say, no, your value is you as a person, and the talents you have, and the connections you have, and the resources that you have. And with UBI, you can use those resources for things that you care about. And so it does have huge potential for unleashing the capacity of lots and lots of people to get involved in other things, creativity, to start to explore the other aspects of their lives. And I think unemployment has been perceived as such a negative feature in the 20th century. To be unemployed, to not have work was a complete, it was such a slap on your life. And what UBI says is actually, you are more than what your productivity in the world of work. Your value is as a human being, as a citizen, and we're going to enable you to explore the things that you want to do. And I think it will unleash massive amount of creativity and innovation and change making once people don't have to do jobs that are unsatisfactory.
Wonderful. We are going to come back a little bit to the economic argument, and we have a question in online from Jap. I'll read it out to you. So, we are so keen, he says, to measure success, yet at the same time we know that there is great complexity in creating health and happiness. And he puts those in inverted commas. Is that why we tend to use economic indicators to determine how well a nation or geography is performing? Or is it more the case that economics trumps everything else?
I mean, I do think there is an issue that that GDP is just easier to measure. That we've developed very good tools for it. I mean, it's not a particularly sophisticated way of measuring it, but we measure it. To measure people's well-being and measure health and, well-being is a much more rounded thing, and our tools for it are not great, but there are great tools now. So there are, the UK is doing this well-being survey, the ONS, the National Statistics, the people that do the census, do a survey on well-being and asking people how they feel and what their happiness is. So, and there are countries that are measuring happiness in quite sophisticated ways. So as we get better at it and we develop our tools for it, I think it will get easier. But I think one of the challenges at the moment is that the tools are not that straightforward. We're still developing the indicators and the measures. So I think economics trumps everything only because that's how we've designed it. At the moment, It does trump everything. But actually, people's human satisfaction, human flourishing, surely matters more. We all know that to be true. So it's only that we've developed a science of economics that has become very good at measuring this set of outcomes. What we're needing to do now, and what we're beginning to do, is develop other ways of measuring things and how to measure human flourishing. And it is what people want to know. It's what you want for your children. It's what I want for mine. We don't want them all just to be wealthy. We want them to be flourishing, to be satisfied, happy people. And given that that's such a human desire, I think that it's only that the measurement tools are just lagging behind at the moment.
Wonderful. So, Radhika, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up soon, but a last question to you. There may be people online who want to get involved in social innovation in their own communities. How can we all get involved?
So I think the first thing is that is to just get going. If there are things that you want to do and things you want to change, find like-minded people and get going. Beyond that, if you're in the UK, get in touch with us at the Young Foundation. We'll put you in touch with other people who are doing things and networks so that you're not doing it in isolation, or somebody else has tried something a bit like you somewhere in another place. The thing that you're wanting to do might be having something else, so there's that. Also, I mean, there is some funding available. So the National Lottery are very keen on local change making. So Awards for All is a fund that's available through the National Lottery for anybody that's got an idea, where there's a group of people that have got an idea. The Power to Change is an organisation that exists to support community businesses. So there's really good resources and help available for people if you want to set up a business. And that can be got through Power to Change. Or if you're just interested in finding out about how to do these things, there's an organisation called IDEO, who do courses, online digital courses on using design tools to bring about change. Do get in touch. hello@theyoungfoundation.org, and it will come through to me, or radhika.bynon@theyoungfoundation.org, and I'll put you in touch with other people. But basically, the most important thing is it's very hard to do change on your own. You need to get together, start talking to other people, and test some stuff. Just practice.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for your advice and for your inspiring comments. Thank you. Now we're going to close out. Thank you so much. So thank you to our viewers online for watching this session. I really enjoyed hearing both from Benedict and Radhika. Obviously very different views on where the world currently is, not contradicting in any way, but bringing us their views from the field of what's happening in the space of technology, and also what's happening in the space of social innovation. And it's really wonderful to talk to people like that who can give us insights from the ground. So that's it for our session from today. Please do check out all of our sessions online at thinkdif.co. It is the final day of the DIF today. The grand finale will be on in the afternoon, so please do stay tuned.